Hello, I'm Anvesha, and welcome to the first episode of this five-part series where we focus on the Wolfram High School Summer Camp experience. In today's episode, we're going to take an in-depth look into some of the projects from this year's virtual Wolfram High School Summer Camp. Today, we're joined by Megha, Sheldon, and Shivam. So I guess we could just get started with the introductions. I'm Anvesha Das, and I'm a high school senior from Kanpur in India. I attended the Wolfram High School Summer Camp in person in Boston in 2019. And following that, I was a part of the Wolfram Emerging Leaders Program in 2019, and I'm currently a Wolfram Student Ambassador. I guess we could all just go around and introduce ourselves. So maybe you could start with Megha.
Hi, I'm Megha Narayanan. I'm a high school sophomore living in Singapore. I participated in this year's Wolfram High School Summer Camp, remote, online, and I'm currently participating in the Wolfram Emerging Leaders Program.
Shivam, maybe you could go next.
All right, my name is Shivam. I'm from the Bay Area in California. I was also part of the virtual summer camp this past summer with Wolfram, and I'm currently involved in the Emerging Leaders Program.
Sheldon.
Hello, I'm Sheldon. I'm a high school senior from Mumbai. I attended the Wolfram Summer Camp this year virtually, and I'm also part of the Wolfram Emerging Leaders Program.
Great. So before we dive into the projects, I thought we could probably just talk a bit about the Wolfram Camp experience. So in my opinion, the project is pretty central to the camp experience. So maybe one of you could talk a bit about how the project selection process worked for you. So like what we did pre-camp and then what happened during the camp. Would anyone like to take that up?
Sure, yeah. So the process was pretty simple. Essentially, before camp, we had some kind of homework to get used to the Wolfram language and just familiarize ourselves so we don't have to spend time learning the syntax. And when camp started, we were still going on with reviews. There were a lot of lectures from the mentors, and they were trying to teach us the Wolfram language, which is obviously a great opportunity to learn. And in terms of actually selecting the project, Stephen compiled a list of a lot of project ideas. And he gave that to us so we could research each of them in our own time and find out which one appeals to us the most. And we would essentially prioritize which ones we wanted to do, and we'd meet with Stephen individually, and he would recommend which one would be the best fit and provide some direction as to how to approach the problem or the idea that's being explored, and essentially introduce us to that entire field.
Sounds great. Oh, yeah, Megha, go ahead.
Something I really enjoyed was being able to meet with Stephen one-on-one to discuss our project and kind of work out the nuances of our project so we could really hone in on something that we were interested in working on, kind of using an aspect of the Wolfram language that was either new or interesting to us. And I really appreciated that like one-on-one contact.
That was actually very similar to my experience. I think that is what really forms the core of the camp experience. Sheldon, did you have a very similar experience too? I'm guessing so.
Yeah, so like with the projects itself, we were in the application process itself, we provided a basic idea of the project we were interested in, and then we went through the list, selected something, and then we had a discussion with Stephen to kind of determine specifically what we would want to pursue.
Mm-hmm. So how long have all of you been coding in the Wolfram language, and what has been the best part about getting to do a project using the Wolfram language? So personally for me, Wolfram language is actually one of the first languages I learned. So it was a very special experience. So maybe all of us can go around and just talk about previous experience and the best part about using Wolfram language.
So I actually only started on Wolfram language as I filled out the application for the summer camp. But after filling out the application and before the summer camp, I got super interested in how concise the Wolfram language was and how simple it made complex ideas of programming and computer science, and how accessible they were to me as someone who was very new to the language. And something I also really enjoyed in my project was I was able to explore graphs and networks, which is something that would be much more difficult to do in a programming language like Java or Python. So that's something I really enjoyed about the Wolfram language.
Yeah, I really like working with the symbolic nature of the language, and the immense flexibility that is there, and also the amount of data we were able to access through the Wolfram repository that's kind of built into the language. So you could do there are a lot of like different projects that you could pursue just based on the amount of data you have available as well.
Yeah, so I started programming a while ago with traditional languages like C++, Python, Java, understanding data structures, algorithms. So the transition was definitely, it was pretty immense because it was going from a low-level language to a much higher level language where you pretty much have everything at your disposal. You don't really need to code functions. A lot of the processes that you need are already built in, which was very cool. So it was definitely an interesting transition, but for the customer that Wolfram is like catered towards, I think it's a very good tool. Very easy to prototype different solutions and explore different concepts.
That's very true. I agree. So just as we were talking about the projects, maybe we could just briefly touch upon how crucial mentors are during the project process, or maybe how did they guide you specifically during the period that you worked on the independent project? Maybe we could go the other order now. So maybe Shivam could start.
Sure. So I was paired up with a mentor who had a lot of experience in the project that was assigned for me. He had a lot of experience in audio engineering, and my project was kind of centralized around that as well. So he was really helpful in making sure that I had the right tools and I knew the right functions in Wolfram, and essentially was just referred to the right stuff to make sure my project was working. So I think he was a really instrumental part of my project and made sure that everything was running smoothly throughout camp. If I ever got stuck on anything, he would encourage me and help me to get out. So I think that was a very, very important part of learning during the camp.
Yeah, I agree. So like I was, since my project was physics related, I also had a mentor who had a background in physics, and so we were able to like sort of work out some of the finer details of my project. So I was able to clarify, make sure that that whatever I was doing was making sense, and then she helped make sure that the actual coding itself was going smoothly throughout the camp. And yeah.
My mentor is also incredibly helpful to me in terms of coding and sifting through documentation for really specific functions I needed, and kind of helping me debug. But something that my mentor provided for me was like a nice reality check, because I think that like with these with projects like the ones you do at the Wolfram High School Summer Camp, it's kind of easy to get lost either in details or in a very big picture structure and not really round out your project. And kind of having someone who knew what was going on in my project all the time, and especially because my project was on contact tracing, which is a very physical concept. It was nice to have someone telling me, well, it's not really realistic that nobody who gets the virus ever gets it again. Someone kind of telling me that was really useful to me.
Definitely. I think breaking down the problem is one of the biggest things the mentors can help you with. So one of the exciting classes that I took at camp, which really stood out to me, was computational religion. And I was just wondering, maybe you guys could talk a bit about your favorite class at camp this year.
My favorite class of camp was on gerrymandering. That was something that was very real and physical to me. That's something I've always been someone really interested in the computational and kind of numbers aspect of politics. And that really played into my interest, and I found that super interesting and super engaging. I liked how it applied into the Wolfram language, and how, again, like easy and simple and concise, the Wolfram language made such a complex topic.
One of my favorite sessions was Under the Hood with Wolfram Alpha, and it was led by two developers of the actual language, and they showed us how things worked under the hood, basically, and how Wolfram language kind of compiles into a lower level language, and how that's executed to provide the functionality that we see. And I thought that was very helpful in actually understanding how the language works, and therefore kind of orienting our own code so that it compiles smoothly.
Yeah, my favorite lecture was on the exoplanets. So as I'm quite interested in physics and philosophy and the way those fields are related. So in addition to like the way that it was adapted to like visualize better in the Wolfram language, the implications of like the of the topic that he was going through, which was the Drake equation and the possibility of life on extraterrestrial planets. That was really interesting.
All of that sounds really cool. I think the remarkable part is that the classes change every year, but I think the essence really remains the same. I think the only one that we had in common was the Wolfram Alpha one. So that was really nice to hear. So have you guys been working on probably extending your project, or do you guys have any plans on what you might do with the project that you did at camp in the future? Mika, I think you could go first. We'll just go like this direction and then the other direction.
I don't have any huge plans for my project going forward, but it did kind of launch me into a exploration kind of outside the Wolfram language of contact tracing and its effects and its uses. And so I'm kind of exploring that concept beyond the scope of purely the programming aspect, and also now bringing into ideas of like government and politics and what's feasible and how people can implement it.
So my project was about about computing radioactive decay products in like as a functional time and decay series. And so during the camp, I was sort of working on one approach to the thing, and then and then later on, I decided to switch to a different approach. I guess after the camp, I was mostly just trying to see both of them through to the end. So like I had one solid finished product by the end of the camp, and I was mostly trying to improve and make the other one more efficient. So I was working on another approach to the problem.
For me, after camp finished, I still had a lot of further steps for my project, and I was trying to work on those. And in addition to that, the WELP program had started, and fortunately I was able to get a team that was very interested in the same kind of research that I did for my project. So we're kind of doing a continuation of that. And since then, I've also tried to kind of write and consolidate my work at the Wolfram camp, and I've been able to submit that to an academic journal. So that was published as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity after camp. If you're dedicated and try to get your ideas in one place, I think there's a lot you can do.
All that sounds really cool. I think definitely a lot of alumni are really involved after the camp as well. We'll be discussing that on another episode, so not giving too much away. But yeah, I also participated in WELP, which is the Wolfram Emerging Leaders Program. For anyone that might not be familiar with the term, it's basically a program where a select group of students from the camp are invited to come back and be divided into groups, and then they work over a semester on a project using the Wolfram language. So yeah, definitely people are very involved even after the camp, and I'm pretty sure that reflects. So yeah, Another, I think we'll just end the questions part with this, is that I was an in-person student, and that was a big deal to me when I attended camp. It would probably be incomplete if we don't ask this. How was virtual camp experience? Let's start with Shivam here.
Sure. So I obviously can't compare it to the in-person camp I wasn't able to attend, but from what I've seen, I think it was pretty nice to have like an online camp experience because we were still at home, still at that same comfort. Obviously, we couldn't interact as directly as we would have in person, but I think we were still able to communicate pretty well using the tools that Wolfram had offered, and it was overall a pretty good experience. And I think the best part was since we were at home after camp had ended, we had our own time to work on the project if we wanted to. So I think we just had a lot longer to work on our assigned projects, which I thought was pretty nice.
Yeah, as camp was virtual this year, there were some limitations, but I think especially like the social activities that they held after like every day of the camp uh, was really good at like making sure that we didn't feel like we were isolated in our homes, and it like connected us together better.
I obviously can't compare to the in-person camp experience, but I almost enjoyed being able to kind of sit in a breakout room with my mentor and the other people in my group, and like how easy it was to like screen share, and all like the virtual experience almost made it a little bit more connected for me than like some other in-person camps that I've been to. So I honestly didn't mind it, even though it took a little bit more effort to get to know the other people at camp.
That's really nice to hear, because I think the switch must have been pretty big even for the organizing team. So it's pretty cool how they took care of it. Great. So I think we can now look at some of the projects from this year's camp that all of you did. So maybe we could start with Megha. So Megha did a project titled Digital Contact Tracing Simulations. So maybe you can just go ahead and present that.
Great. So my, hold on, I'm just going to pull up my project. Here is a Wolfram notebook of my computational essay of my project. So something that what my project worked on was exploring how contact tracing can affect the spread of a virus or an infection through a social network, which I modeled with a graph. So in order to kind of model the social network, I created a random graph with some set number of nodes, which would represent people, and the connections between the nodes or interactions between people. Then for the function I created to simulate a infection spreading, there were some set parameters, which were like the probability and mortality rate of the disease, how many cycles or days it took for someone to recover, how many cycles or days someone would be in quarantine if they were properly contact traced and then placed in quarantine. So then if they were positive for the virus, they weren't spreading it. I defined some associations, which one which had all of the infected people in it, or infected nodes, and one which had all of the quarantined nodes, and each of them had a counter, which was how many cycles they had been infected or how many cycles they had been in quarantine. And when that counter ran out, they would be removed from the association and kind of put back in with the general population. So then in simulating the spread of the virus, I created a recursive function that would run some set number of times for some set number of cycles. And the first thing it did was get rid of people or return people to the general population that were in quarantine or that were infected. Some number of people should have recovered from the disease actually like were died from it and got removed from the graph for the rest of the cycles. And that depended on the mortality probability, which is a set parameter at the beginning of the function. Then for each node, for each infected person on the graph, I compiled a list of each of the nodes that they had been in contact with the first degree out. And some number of those contacts got infected with the disease, and some number of them got contact traced and quarantined. And so what I did with this function was I created some graphs modeling going across is the probability of being is increasing probability of being able to trace contacts, and going down is increasing probability of some given person with an infection spreading it to someone else. So you can see that even though there were only 250 nodes, there were 304 infections when the virus was incredibly infectious and there was no contact tracing because people could get infected more than once, even though they had some amount of immunity after they'd gotten it once. But even with an incredibly infectious virus, with really good contact tracing, with like a 90% probability of being contact traced if you were a contact of an infected node, there was just one death out of 250 nodes compared to 64, which kind of showed how effective contact tracing was. But we can also see, like I also saw using these graphs, that around the 70% mark, so contact tracing that's around 70% effective is nearly as good as contact tracing that is 90% effective, but not quite as good as contact tracing that is 50% effective. So it also kind of helped me find a sweet spot of how much contact tracing is necessary and feasible and will help the general population. And here are just some animations of how a virus could spread through infected nodes over time. Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think we'll just move on to the next project. So we have Sheldon now, who will be presenting his project titled Computing Radioactive Decay Products as a Function of Time. Sheldon, I think you can just go ahead and share your screen and
Yeah. Okay, so basically we know that in radioactive decays that the an isotope will follow like an exponential decay, like given by this sort of general function. So in my case, rather than solving like the Bateman equations for the entire series, I try to just I try to use like a variation of using this to calculate the amount of product left, and then we could just apply that recursively to the entire chain. Since that would be much easier for like a computer to calculate. So so like the core of my project was just creating a graph like this, which is fairly easy to do just by following the daughter nuclides of each radioactive isotope and linking them all together based on what produces what. And then based on this, we could generate each of the possible paths from start to finish. So like from polonium to lead, you could go from like this way, and this way, and then generating the entire generating a formula for each of them and adding them together. So so using these like sort of expressions that I had like written down over there, we're able to like apply the exponential decay at each node successively, and then at every branch we just weight them by the branching ratios, and we're able to like sum up the contributions from each like branch like that, and like calculate the amounts. So if we go over here, we can see like the plot as a function of time. So we see that we started with polonium 214 over there, and we can see how the amount is like decreasing with time. And then I just chose like two other elements to like show. So over here we have bismuth 210, which, as you can see by the highlighted section of the chain, which is like the main decay part. So we can see Visnut 210 is like in the main decay chain, and we can see that it has it has like uh, a, a, a large decay constant, so it decays pretty quickly. And we can see thallium 206, which is like on the which is not part of the main decay, so so very little of it gets produced at all. So we can see how only a little bit of that is produced, and that also decays quickly. And in the end, everything converts into lead 206, and that amount increases. So now the thing about most of this code is that it's pretty general. It just takes the graph, and then using all the parts which it sums together, it creates like a general sort of formula based on the values such as like the decay constant and the branching ratios, which can be fetched from the Wolfram database. So this can be applied to this can also be applied to larger chains. So like here's just a graph that I had for the previous one, which shows like all of the isotopes combined, and we can see how which ones have increasing and decreasing amount as a function of time. And this is just like a visualization of whether of of which one gets produced. So we can see that lead 210 is like produced for most of the time, and then as time goes on, it all converts into lead 206 because those two decay pretty quickly. And for longer chains over here, we can see, for example, with radon 222, it this kind of chain would usually like have like a lot of isotopes involved and a lot of decay constants, but this program generalizes pretty well, and we're able to see like this results as expected. So like with the initial isotope, we see the amount decreasing, and then the ones in the middle, they increase initially, and then they reach a maximum and decrease, and then the final, and then at the end, most of it gets converted to lead 206, and you have like a little bit of thallium 205. But yeah, that's basically how it works. We are able to get around solving like Bateman equations by using these sort of graph objects and creating formulas just based on the basic exponential decay.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That was actually really cool. Yeah, I think we'll be finishing this up with the last project. So we have Shivam, who's going to talk about his project where he worked on simulating audio with different arrangement of speakers. Yeah.
All right, I will share my screen. So the project that I had selected was called Simulating Spatial Audio with Different Arrangements of Speakers. So essentially just trying to emulate spatial audio or higher quality audio in the Wolfram language. So that was the objective of my project. So when I first began, I essentially modeled it very simply. Let's say you have a head and you're located in some two-dimensional space. Your left ear is here, your right ear is here, and you have a sound source here. Knowing this, you can deduce how long it would take the sound to reach either ear. And you can find out that there would be a time difference using basic processing, just distance equals rate times time. You would find that there's some delay, and that could be modeled here using an audio plot. You can clearly see that the right side would be much softer than the left side. And it would also start the audio a lot later. And that's due to the speed of sound and the differing distances. So this was a very simple way to model this. And some of the shortcomings that I had identified was that it would be very difficult to model obstacles and boundaries and things like that, just using a simple formula like this one. So what my mentor had advised was looking into acoustic modeling, and especially modeling acoustics in the time domain. So this involved creating an acoustic region, a two-dimensional space, and defining a head. I made it very simple, it's just a circle, and a sound emitter, which is also like a quarter circle on the right side. And using the wave equation and setting some boundary conditions using the documentation that was provided by Wolfram, and some of his suggestions, I was able to create a function that solved for the pressure or the volume at any point in the room with a sound source. And you could also like visualize this as it changes through time. So that's what this aims to do. So any changes you're viewing are with respect to time. So that's what that looks like. And it's pretty intuitive. Sound is being radiated from a sound source, and you can look at how the pressure changes throughout the room. And I also made a simple visualization in 3D as well, which was pretty interesting. And after I'd interpreted these visualizations, I realized decomposing an audio file and then going through this entire process of simulating everything in the time domain was very computationally intensive. So what I had decided to do was to model acoustics in the frequency domain. And what this enabled me to do was essentially pass in frequency, a time, and a frequency and a spatial location into a function, and it would return the amplitude at that location. Instead of solving for every single point in time, which is very computationally intensive. So that's what I did here. Similar process, defining acoustic region. And in this case, instead of using the wave equation, I used the Helmholtz differential equation. And solving that with the Wolfram ND solve, I got a function output, and that could be visualized here. So in this case, the sound source is here, and it's emitting a 500 hertz signal. And this is the head of the observer. And you can see how the volume differs throughout the room. So it's going to be way louder over here, and it would slowly start to attenuate. It would get softer as it reaches the viewer. And essentially at this point, you can just probe the left and right ear volumes and apply that to the original audio, the audio file. So that's what I tried to do here. I decomposed an audio file into its frequencies using a Fourier transform. And then from here, I simply applied whatever function I solved for to each of the frequency bandwidths. So if you could imagine, like this function could be solved for many different frequencies, and you could probe the pressure data for each ear at any of those frequencies. And that's what I aim to do here. I simply separated it by frequency and applied the function. And this is the spectrogram of the produced audio. And upon listening to this, I think it worked pretty well. And the audio did sound like it was emulated spatially. And it was coming from a spatial location. And it wasn't just a simple like mono channel kind of audio file. So that was pretty cool. And after completing the project, I kind of formulated that my further steps for this would be to attempt to try to recreate this in 3 dimensions, and also find a better way to process the audio. One of the shortcomings of Wolfram was that it's such a high level language, it's very difficult for it to pay attention to a lot of the details that you can achieve with the lower level language. So it was great to experiment with, but in terms of actually like creating a product, I think it would need to be implemented in the lower level language so the details can be preserved and it would just flow a lot smoother. And yeah, that's basically my project.
Thank you, Shivam, so much for sharing that with us. That was really interesting. All of your projects were really cool. And we were just wondering that before we close out, maybe we could just go over a couple of aspects about your project. So what were your favorite parts of the project? Just, it can be brief, that's all right. We could start with Megha and then Sheldon and then Shivam, and then we could just go the other way around, the next one.
I really enjoyed writing the computational essay and kind of like applying my context or applying my project into a larger context. That was something I really liked.
Yeah, I really like working with like the graph plot objects. I like especially finding the paths using that. I kind of figured out a way to incorporate that as well in the Emerging Leaders Program project. And so yeah, that was quite nice.
The thing that I enjoyed most was just learning about a new field in general. I had never been exposed to audio engineering before, and learning about it was very, very interesting, and applying whatever math knowledge I had to a different field was very cool. And getting the guidance from the mentors was also very interesting. One of the things that I enjoyed the most, though, was getting in touch with audio professionals at Wolfram. So my mentor had connected me with someone at Wolfram who had actually developed the audio library and a lot of the functions that were part of that. And I think just the connection was very important in my project, and I think I learned a lot just from meeting professionals.
That's really nice. I think that's one of the best parts about going to a camp like Wolfram. They can really directly put you in touch with professionals working in those fields. So now that we went over the favorite part, maybe we can just go over the part that you struggled the most with. So we'll start with Shivam this time.
So one of the things was being remote. The camp hours deferred for a lot of people, so it was hard to adjust. I'm from the Bay Area, so it wasn't too bad, but I know a lot of people who were international who really struggled with that. So that was one drawback. Other than that, I think the overall experience and the academic part of it I think it was preserved really well through the online medium. There wasn't much changed, and I feel like the Wolfram spirit was still there for sure.
Yeah, I think I definitely do agree with the time zones things. Like I was on many days I was staying up till like 3, 4 a.m. like doing the project. I was actually quite happy to stay up till 7 a.m. also if it meant playing trivia with Stephen Wolfram. But yeah, definitely agree with the time zones.
Something that was kind of difficult for me was kind of managing the pace of my project, because I got, 80% of my project done in the first 2 days, in terms of like mass of code, and I felt like I was really ahead, but then I didn't kind of anticipate some of the smaller aspects that would take me a lot more time, like debugging or getting my computational essay into shape. And I definitely think my mentor helped me with that, but it was something I struggled with.
That's actually relatable. Maintaining pace can be overwhelming sometimes. So yeah, finally, if you could change something, not necessarily restricted to just one thing about the process, what would that be?
I think that I would have chosen my project even earlier in the camp, or kind of like, had a better idea of where I was going even earlier in the camp, because some of the early lectures that we had, I think that if I had really been focusing on them and through a lens of my project idea, I could have gotten even more out of them.
I think I kind of agree with that. I could have definitely done a lot more work on my project if I settled on it earlier. Of course, now I could do that in the future work, but I think it would have been quite nice to like show off a project with like more features if I had chosen it early in the camp and begun working on it before.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The camp is 2 weeks long, and we spend a majority of the first week just familiarizing yourself with the language. So I think that an extended period of time to work on our project, or even just being introduced to our project earlier, would have been really helpful. And I think that's the main thing I would change. Maybe another thing would be more time with the mentors, and just getting more mentorship, and maybe even to be able to continue that out of camp, just keep the connection and still further our projects.
All right. Yeah, so with that, we're actually at the end of this episode. I would once again like to thank Megha, Sheldon, and Shivam for joining us today and walking us through their projects and talking more about their camp experience. I would also like to thank our audience for joining us. Yeah, we hope to see you in our future episodes.